It is Monday, August 8th. We got a new intro for you. You're watching Right on Cue College Sports. That's right. Welcome back. Welcome in. Thanks for checking us out. You are watching Right on Cue College Sports. How about that new intro, huh? Yeah, we're continuing to tinker. We're continuing to learn a little bit here, a little bit there. I've been going through, getting all your feedback, trying to incorporate those things into the content we're putting out. Also, just appreciate all your suggestions, all your support. Thanks for checking us out. Thanks for watching. Remember, you can send me your feedback at RightOnQCS on Twitter or RightOnQCS@gmail.com. I'm going through that. I am reading through it, sending out responses, or like I said, incorporating suggestions into the content. We have been moving through this series of college football conference previews. We started, based off a suggestion, we started putting together some college football pump-up little short videos to get you pumped up for the upcoming season. Just trying to continue to get that content out for you. Today, though, we are going to be previewing the Atlantic Coast Conference, otherwise known as the ACC. Now, this is really the only conference that has a major conference, right, that hasn't really had any impact from realignment so far, at least the last couple of years of realignment. There has been some rumors that Miami, Florida State, Clemson have been kind of wooed by the SEC, but no changes as of yet. And, you know, we all kind of talk about, and I agree with this, I fall into this camp, that the Big Ten is clearly the second best conference after the SEC in college football. But check this out. In the last 16 national champions, only 4 did not come from the SEC. Of those 4, 3 of them are from the ACC. That would be Florida State in 2013 with old crab legs Jameis Winston. You got Clemson in 2016 and Clemson in 2018. Now, the ACC reported $578.3 million in football revenue last year. So let me read you this quote here. According to ESPN, ACC Commissioner Jim Phillips opened the league's annual kickoff event on July 20th, by saying he was exploring all available options to reduce the revenue gap with the SEC and Big Ten, as we all now know, also the Big 12. But he argued that the arms race in college football risks doing critical damage to the college athletics as a whole. Very interesting. But we move on from that. Now on the recruiting trail, let's take a look at the recruiting numbers. According to 247sports.com, Clemson and North Carolina had the 10th and 11th ranked recruiting class in the country. They each signed 2 5-star players. For Clemson, that was quarterback Cade Klubnik and defensive back Jaden Lucas. For the Heels, offensive tackle Zach Rice and defensive lineman Travis Shaw. Miami had the 16th ranked recruiting class in the country, and Florida State kind of rounded out the top 4. They were 20th in the country. Now, on the field last year, like Oklahoma in the Big 12, Clemson's conference championship in a row streak came to an end last year as Wake Forest and the Pitt Panthers played for the ACC title in 2021. Pitt got the win over Wake Forest in a runaway, really, 45-21. In all, the ACC had 9 teams that were bowl eligible, but just 6 teams played games. Hopefully, I don't know. Hopefully we move beyond kind of the COVID cancellation stuff at this point. But of those 6 bowl games that they did play in, they won just 2. So not good. Air Force beat Louisville. South Carolina beat North Carolina, and Michigan State beat Pitt. Maryland absolutely crushed Virginia Tech, 54-10. Yikes. Now, how about some coaching changes around the ACC? It pretty much starts and stops right here in Coral Gables. Mario Cristobal becomes the new head coach at Miami from Oregon. You also had Tony Elliott, who is offensive coordinator under Dabo Swinney at Clemson, becomes the new head coach at Virginia. Brent Pry, the former offensive coordinator from Penn State, becomes the new head coach at Virginia Tech. And Texas A&M defensive coordinator Mike Elko becomes the new head coach at Duke. How about in the transfer portal? There really was not a lot of kind of top-line activity, players going in and out of the ACC this past offseason. Your top three programs from the ACC in the transfer portal, you had Florida State, Miami, Louisville. They were 11th, 12th, and 16th in the country. Now, Pittsburgh had most of the noise. Pittsburgh brought in USC quarterback Keaton Slovis, and then obviously lost Jordan Addison, their reigning Biletnikoff Award-winning wide receiver, from Pitt to USC. Georgia Tech stud running back Yamir Gibbs transferred out to Alabama. Virginia, Victor Oluwatimi, big man, goes to Michigan. West Virginia D lineman Akeem Mesidor transferred into Miami. You also had Louisville wide receiver Tyler Harrell transferred to Alabama. Arizona State D lineman Jermaine Lowell then transferred into Louisville. They also got running back Tyon Evans from Tennessee. A couple of good pieces they picked up. Syracuse wide receiver Taj Harris transferred out to Rutgers. Miami big defensive lineman Nesta Jade Silvera transferred over to Arizona State. And Temple wide receiver Jaden Blue transferred to Virginia Tech. The last kind of transfers of note, Miami, Ohio edge Cameron Butler transferred into Virginia Tech. Central Arkansas wide receiver Tyler Hudson transferred into Louisville. All of those names I just listed were either 4 or 5-star transfers, so worth noting. How about some players to watch in the upcoming college football season? There's really kind of a suite of very talented quarterbacks in this conference. At North Carolina State, very talented and stable quarterback in Devin Leary. Tremendous upside and talent with the next couple of guys. Sam Hartman, quarterback out of Wake Forest. Remember, took them to the ACC championship game last year. Into his sophomore year, Tyler Van Dyke at Miami. Really going to be slinging the ball around. Brennan Armstrong was second in the country in passing yards last year at Virginia. And then a real talented, kind of under-the-radar, dual-threat quarterback in Malik Cunningham at Louisville. How about some players outside of quarterback? At running back, really, the conversation starts and ends with Syracuse tailback Sean Tucker, tremendously talented, but the rest of that team is just completely decimated. Wide receivers, you have Josh Downs from North Carolina, who's been tremendous for a couple of years now, as well as A.T. Perry out of Wake Forest, first team all-conference, both of those guys. And then returning for Boston College, their tremendous stud wide receiver, Zay Flowers. They're hoping they can get that Phil Jerkovich to Zay Flowers connection going in 2021. How about players to watch on the defensive side? I mean, you have the dynamic duo, obviously, of D-tackle Brian Brzee and D-end Miles Murphy at Clemson. That is unquestionably the most talented and skilled defensive line in the country. At Virginia, stud linebacker Nick Jackson is back after an outstanding 2021 campaign. And then at North Carolina State, you really have a couple of very talented linebackers in that core. Peyton Wilson, but the dude we're featuring here is linebacker Drake Thomas. How about in the secondary? Jamie Robinson from Florida State has been a tremendous ball hawk in the secondary, as well as the defensive back Keitrell Clark out of Louisville. So now let's go ahead and let's take a look at where our power rankings have each of these teams, 14 of them in the Atlantic Coast Conference, finding themselves. And you can see right here, we'll start with the Atlantic Division. And I think the cream of the crop remains Clemson, although there are tremendous question marks on the offensive side of the ball. I mean, obviously, you lost your offensive coordinator, but I mean, DJ Uiagalelei was just terrible last year. I think Wake Forest will be strong, and North Carolina State will as well. Louisville gets a little bit better, and then just really issues for Florida State and Boston College. Syracuse is terrible, and they really probably should have fired Dino Babers this last offseason, but he sticks around for another year. So let's go ahead and let's kick things off with the Clemson Tigers, who have won 2 national titles since 2016. Now, Clemson lost both their offensive coordinator, like I mentioned, Tony Elliott, who is the new head coach at Virginia, and their defensive coordinator, Brent Venables, who is now the new head coach at Oklahoma. Now, DJ Uiagalelei is still listed as the expected starter. You know, listen, everyone's trying to say like a switch from DJ to a 5-star quarterback in Cade Klubnik is going to happen. Kind of would be like Kelly Bryant to Trevor Lawrence from years past. You know, listen, Kelly Bryant was a much better quarterback in 2017 than DJ was last year. Bryant threw for 2,800 yards, rushed for 665, had 24 touchdowns. Last year, DJ threw for just 2,200 yards. He had only 9 touchdowns to 10 interceptions, passing on just 55% completion percentage. That's 10% below what Bryant put up in 2017. Listen, don't be disrespecting Kelly Bryant like that by comparing him to DJ. Okay, I am befuddled that they haven't made the switch yet. Maybe an indication that Klubnik isn't quite ready, but 119 quarterbacks had a better passer rating than DJ did last year, so that's kind of a problem. Now up front, their left tackle Jordan McFadden is a preseason first-team all-conference, but outside of him, you have 3 brand new starters. You got a sophomore at left guard and a freshman at right guard. Now these are highly recruited guys, but still, man, that's young and inexperienced. In the wideout group, Justin Ross has gone pro, your do-everything receiver. But you do have some returning talent in Joseph Nagata, and the sophomore Bo Collins showed really some flashes of talent last year. Not really all that impressive of a group, but they do have flashes of talent. You know, especially with all the questions surrounding the QB selection, Will Shipley will be the bellwether in the backfield. He is a preseason first-team All-ACC selection. They leaned on him heavy last year at running back. He went for 739 yards, 11 touchdowns. The Tigers do return 84% of their offensive production, though. So, I mean, some carryover and growth is kind of expected, but there are at least 6 teams in this conference with a better offense than Clemson has. Another reason I could see them running the ball a lot is because they have the second most talented defense in the country. Just kind of like just don't turn the ball over and kind of play for field position, and that's how they'll get their wins this year. And speaking of that defense, the marquee is, like I said, the most talented defensive line in the country. Miles Murphy really shot up draft boards last year as he collected 7 sacks. And you got Brian Brzee. You know, he kind of dealt with some injuries that sidelined him last year, but he is a backfield wrecker. In each of the last 2 seasons, he's been a stud. He's kind of a consensus top 15 pick in next year's NFL draft. The leader in the linebacking core is unquestionably Trenton Simpson, who collected 6 sacks of his own in 2021 and 65 total tackles. The linebacking group is really widely talented as well. They returned 3 starters. Now, replacing James Skalski is the sophomore 5-star recruit Barrett Carter. Get to know the name. I mean, he's probably the next generation of Clemson great defensive players. The secondary has 2 new sophomore starters, but they're bolstered by first-team all-conference selection at safety in Andrew Mukuba. The group may take some time to kind of mesh and gel, especially with a new defensive coordinator, but all the talent in the world is there. So let's take a look at the schedule. That game at Wake in Week 3 could really kind of determine who wins this division next year. Clemson lost at home to Wake last year, 48-27, something to keep in mind. Their defense really came up flat in that game. But you get NC State, Louisville, and Miami at home. This is not a super difficult schedule, but they certainly have their work cut out for them. Oh yeah, at Notre Dame on November 5th as well. I could see 2 losses on here unless they switch from DJ to Cade, and that kind of revolutionizes the offense. 10-2, and the Wake game kind of determines who wins this division. Now, speaking of Wake Forest, preseason first-team All-ACC quarterback Sam Hartman is the showcase. 4,228 yards, 39 touchdowns last year. That was 7th most passing yards in the country. His number 1 target, A.T. Perry, back as well. The two connected for almost 1,300 yards and 15 touchdowns in 2021. The Deacons had two 1,000-yard receivers last year. The other, Ja'Carry Robertson, was drafted by the Dallas Cowboys, so he's out the door. But in comes Taylor Marin, who had 610 yards, 5 touchdowns last year. That's serviceable. I mean, this passing game is really going to probably still be pretty stellar. You do return 4 starters on the O-line, but sophomore Devontae Gordon will be a first-time starter at left tackle. A little bit of concern on the blind side. Now, it may surprise you with all the passing that Dave Clawson offense likes to do, but Wake averaged 160 yards on the ground last year as well. Behind that seasoned O-line will be sophomore tailback Justice Ellison. Now, he kind of split time with Christian Beal-Smith in 2021. They both went for about 540 yards, 7 touchdowns. This offense is going to be really sensational. I have no doubt about that. Now, with that being said, the offense will need to put up big numbers because the defense has not been and will not be great. They were 91st in the country last season, giving up 413 yards and just over 4 touchdowns per game, and they bring back only 64% of their starting production. One huge loss this offseason is Luke Masterson at linebacker. He led the team in tackles at 85 and had 2.5 sacks last year as well. They'll really kind of be looking for Ryan Semeda to replace Masterson as the defensive unit leader. Semeda went for 83 tackles, 2 forced fumbles last year as a starter. Up front, Rondell Brothroyd is Wake Forest's only defensive player to make preseason all-conference selection. He was selected second team at D-end. Brothroyd collected 8 sacks in 2021 and will anchor a really pretty serviceable all-senior defensive line with Bergen and Williams. The real weakness is going to be in the secondary, where they will have 3 first-time starting sophomores in Holmes and Carson at cornerback and Nick Anderson at safety. Do you remember the game they played against Army last year? That game was so much fun to watch. 70-56 was the final score. I mean, there was just absolutely no defense. The secondary was really pretty terrible. They need to improve in that position group. They do, however, avoid 2 of the best passing offenses in the conference this year in Virginia and Pittsburgh. So the secondary kind of lucks out there. Wake, looking at the schedule, Wake will be 3-0 when they host Clemson. Now this one will be interesting because Clemson has a top 15 defense and really kind of a terrible offense, and Wake is the opposite with a top 15 offense and really kind of a terrible defense. Like I mentioned, Wake Forest won at Clemson last year, 48-27. That Wake Forest offense beat the Clemson defense in the matchup last year. Then you got, back-to-back at Louisville and NC State. That won't be easy. But I think Wake will get 9 wins here at least. I'm going to give them 10-2. You'll have a situation where Clemson and Wake Forest both go 10-2, and Clemson maybe wins on the head-to-head. Third in this division, the NC State Wolfpack. You know, Wolfpack quarterback Devin Leary was named the second-team all-conference at quarterback, but he's really been kind of flying under the radar. He has the second highest returning passer rating in the conference and had a 35 to just 5 touchdown to interception ratio last year. That is really impressive. Now he's not going to give you the 400-yard passing games like Hartman or Brennan at Virginia, but he's reliable. He's not going to make the mistakes that they have and that they do. 2 of the Pack's top 3 receivers are back in Thayer Thomas, who went for 596 yards, 8 touchdowns, and Devin Carter, who went for 556 and 6 touchdowns in 2021. Now, your question might be, if Leary is so good, why do I have their offensive ranking at 49? Well, you have a brand new running back replacing the stud Zonovan Knight, who plays for the Jets now, and that is Jordan Houston. You have 4 new starters on the offensive line, 2 of which are sophomore first-time starters, and another sophomore first-time starter at tight end. Moving to the defense, this unit returns 88% of their production from last year, and that was a top 15 scoring defense a year ago. I see this defense being really one of the best in the country in 2022. Let's start with the best linebacking group in the conference. Peyton Wilson and Drake Thomas were both first-team all-conference selections, and they're anchoring this really pretty solid 3-4 set. Thomas had 99 tackles, 6 sacks, and 3 interceptions last year, leading this unit after their consensus first-team All-ACC linebacker from 2020. Peyton Wilson went down with a season-ending shoulder injury in Week 2. Now, Wilson had surgery and is supposedly fully recovered. Everything sounds pretty good out of fall camp. So if he is fully recovered, I mean, these two are going to be a really menacing pair. They are a bit thin up front with a sophomore first-time starter at nose tackle, C.J. Clark, but grad transfer Corey Durden at defensive end has a ton of experience and collected 3.5 sacks last year. And the secondary returns 4 of their 5 starters, and senior free safety Tanner Engel is a second-team All-ACC selection. The Pack were top 30 in the country in pass defense last year, and they played 2 of the top 10 passers in the country in 2021. So, this is defensive coordinator Tony Gibson. Colorado should take a hard look at him as a coaching candidate if Darrell does not work out. But anyways, moving on, let's take a look at their schedule. The NC State defensive front, they're going to really have their hands full with Keaton Mitchell at running back in week 1 against East Carolina. But I think they'll probably get the win. Then the schedule is really pretty soft. I think you're looking at 9-3 here. A win at Clemson and at Louisville will be tough to acquire. But, they get Wake Forest at home on November 5th. If they can win that, they'll probably be second in the division. Now let's move on to the Louisville Cardinals. This Cardinal offense starts and ends really with one man, and that's Malik Cunningham, who is back at quarterback for the fourth season in a row. That kind of consistency really cannot be overstated. Last year, he almost became just the 7th player ever in college football history to pass for 3,000 yards and rush for 1,000. His numbers 2,941 and 1,031. I mean, it was 60 yards passing short. This dude had 20, count them, 20 rushing touchdowns last year. I mean, this is kind of a borderline top 35 team because of this offense. Now, they will have a new look outside of Cunningham. Upgrades at wideout in 2 big transfer pickups, Tyler Hudson from Central Arkansas and D. Wiggins from Miami. Consistency returns in the backfield with Cunningham in starting tailback Jalen Mitchell. 4 returning starters on the offensive line, but a sophomore starting at right tackle and a sophomore at tight end. This offense is going to need to hold on to the ball, control the clock, and really keep scoring because the defense is going to struggle against the high-flying passing offenses in this conference. Now, speaking of that defense, Yasir Abdullah will be the play caller at Card linebacker this year. He's a returning starter who had 61 tackles and 10 sacks last year. He's the only returning starter, though, in the linebacking group as they brought in grad transfer Momo Sanogo from Ole Miss to try and bolster this depleted group. The D-line is really kind of suspect coming out of this offseason. Senior DN Yaya Diaby played most games last year, but only collected 1.5 sacks. That's not enough to move the needle. Really kind of a non-factor, like I said. The other 2 D linemen are brand new starters. The defensive secondary in the back there is headlined by first-team All-ACC selection at quarterback in Keitrell Clark. The dude had 9 pass deflections and 3 interceptions last season, but this defense is starting a true freshman in every position group. There's new starters everywhere. I'm really concerned about this defense. Now, don't be surprised if the D-line struggles with first-team all-conference tailback Sean Tucker and the Syracuse run game in Week 1. That one really could be a make or break for Louisville or Syracuse. It's a really interesting Week 1 game. These first 2 games are really kind of trap games, both on the road. The offense better be clicking. Florida State and South Florida are wins, I believe. The schedule is really actually pretty tough. You get the 3 best passing teams in the conference in October and finish out at Clemson, NC State, and at Kentucky. Man, I mean, 8-4 is probably a very generous ceiling for the Cards this year. Now, speaking of those Florida State Seminoles, this Florida State bunch really looked like they were almost back last year as they forced Notre Dame into overtime Week 1. But then you lost by 3 at home to Jacksonville State, and man, was that ugly. They did beat Miami, though, and Boston College at the end of the year, but the hot seat is turned way up for head coach Mike Norvell. At quarterback, Jordan Travis is back for his junior season. There's a lot of hype surrounding this guy. I'm not so sure if I buy it. He shows flashes of talent here and there, but he had the 7th best completion percentage in the conference, and he only had 2 games in 2021 with more than 2 pass touchdowns. You need more out of the passing game than that. 5 of the 11 projected starters for this upcoming season are sophomores. 3 of them on the offensive line. Yikes. At running back, you have a former 3-star recruit in Trey Benson, who transferred in from Oregon. Kind of remains to be seen whether that's an upgrade or not. There's some talent, but, I mean, this is very young and inexperienced on this side of the ball. I think it's going to be a bit of a liability. Now, something that really flew under the radar is the defense was actually pretty good last year. They were 7th in the country in red zone efficiency. I mean, that can really keep you in games when you hold teams to field goals instead of touchdowns. Now, I already mentioned they return stud safety Jamie Robinson, who's first-team All-ACC selection, 84 tackles, 4 interceptions, 2 forced fumbles last year. But you have 3 new starters in the secondary, 2 of which are sophomores. Then you got Derek McClendon, who's going to be a first-time starting sophomore at D-end. But this unit does return 90% of their production from last year. I think the defense is going to need to keep them in games, but man, I just don't think they have enough in offense to contend this year. You're at Louisville, at North Carolina State, Clemson, and at Miami. Those are all losses. So the neutral site game against LSU, the home game with Wake, and a home game against Florida at the end of the year, those really kind of become must-wins if Norvell wants to keep his job. I think the Noles are going to finish somewhere between 4-8 and 7-5. Ton of variance here, but Norvell needs to go. He's not the man for the job. Now Boston College. Oh my gosh. Man, what a sad story here. Now, last year was really the year for BC, entering the season with 2 O-linemen on the preseason first-team all-conference, and you had Zay Flowers at wideout, who was first-team as well. They won their first 2 games by a combined score of 96-28, and were well on their way to probably like a 10-2, 9-3 record. But at the end of the second game, starting quarterback Phil Dracovic, who threw for 2,500 yards, 17 touchdowns in the shortened COVID season 2020, went down with a serious throwing hand injury. You know, he was out for long stretches of last season. He would come back, but man, he was never the same. The Eagles lost 6 of their last 8 games. And, you know, heading into the 2022 season, guess who's your starting quarterback? Jurkovic. I mean, is he fully healed? Who knows, right? Are we going to see the depleted version from the end of last season, or the first-team all-conference caliber we saw in 2020 and the start of last season? Like I said, I mean, before the injury, he was sensational. But in the couple of games he played since, he has been rough to watch. Like I said, Zay Flowers is back at wideout, which helps a lot. But your only first-team all-conference player, offensive lineman Christian Mahogany, tore his ACL just last month. You now are starting 2 freshmen and a sophomore on that O-line. On the defense, corner Josh DeBerry had 2 picks and a forced fumble last year and was rewarded with a selection to first-team All-ACC this year. That's mostly based on potential. This secondary is actually a pretty talented group, and the Eagles will defend the pass better than you think. But the problem is, last season they got crushed in their run defense. They gave up 170 yards per game rushing, and they didn't make any major changes in the box this offseason. Now, looking at the schedule, I mean, I have Rutgers as improved this year, but I have the Eagles getting the win at home in Week 1. At Virginia Tech is a possible win, and then another win. You'll lose the next 4, then a win at UConn for sure. Duke and Syracuse at home, I think, are probably both wins as well. Listen, these guys could get to 6-6 if they pull off those first 3 wins, but I think more likely 5-7 this year. Now, speaking of Syracuse, like I said, I cannot believe Dino Babers wasn't fired this offseason. That 10-3 season he had in 2018 just continues to keep him afloat. But your last 3 seasons, you have been 5-7, 1-10, 5-7. They've won just 5 conference games in the last 3 years. They lost their last 3 games last year by a combined score of 113-34. Just a series of complete beatdowns. This season, every one of their skill players are sophomores. Running back and 3 wideouts. Your starting quarterback, Garrett Schrader, is back, but he threw just 9 touchdowns to 4 interceptions last year. What? I mean, do watch out for running back Sean Tucker, who is great and was first-team all-conference selection. He will be a pro, but there is really just not much else here. Now on defense, Mikel Jones at middle linebacker returns as the Orange leading tackler with 109 tackles and 3 sacks last year. But, I mean, there's not a ton of additional talent outside of him on the defense. This is a team that's really Sean Tucker and Mikel Jones, and that's basically it. Speaking of the defense, 8 starting sophomores. one starting freshman in this group. I mean, how can a coaching staff possibly allow this to happen? Okay, looking at the schedule here, I really only see maybe 3 possible wins at Connecticut, Virginia, and Wagner at home. I mean, they definitely lose their last 7 games. 3-9 is possible, but I think 2-10 more likely. The 'Cuse must move on from Dino Babers. So, now let's move on to take a look at the Coastal Division. And you can see right here, I've got the front runners as the Pitt Panthers. I've seen several prediction groups thinking that Miami is going to be the team that's going to win this division. I don't buy it. Pittsburgh, I think, is wildly talented. My numbers have them at 11, but I mean, this really seems like a top 10 talent-wise team. Miami, top 25 for sure, but I don't see them anywhere close to Pittsburgh. North Carolina, you can see I have 3rd. Virginia, 44th in the country, and then a dramatic drop-off to Virginia Tech, Georgia Tech, and then Duke is just abysmal. Let's start with the Pitt Panthers. You know, Kenny Pickett was a complete revelation last year, and he now plays for the Pittsburgh Steelers. So how do you replace 4,300 yards, 42 touchdowns passing, and 240 yards and 5 touchdowns rushing? Well, Pitt is hoping that incoming transfer Keaton Slovis from USC can get the job done. Now, Slovis had a neck injury last year that sidelined him for stretches, but in 2019, he threw for 3,500 yards, 30 touchdowns, and in 6 games, that because the Pac-12 only played half a season in 2020, he averaged 320 yards passing and just under 3 pass touchdowns per game. I mean, at 6'3", 205, he has virtually the same frame as Pickett. Now, I mean, yes, obviously you lost reigning Biletnikoff Award-winning wide receiver Jordan Addison, but this receiving group is still very talented. Kanata Mumfield transfers in from Akron. He went for 751 yards and 8 touchdowns last year. He joins the Panthers' second leading receiver from last year in Jared Wayne, who had 658 yards, 6 touchdowns for him. All 5 offensive linemen are back, and they are big. Every man over 6'3" and 300 pounds. Slovis will have all the protection he needs. Listen, at left tackle, Carter Warren goes 6'5", 325. And at right tackle, Gabe Huey is 6'6", 325. These are massive men on the edge of the line. Slovis is going to be able to sit in that pocket as long as he wants. Now, the team's leading rusher, Israel Abankata, is back after putting up 651 yards and 7 touchdowns last year on the ground. He also had 197 yards receiving and a touchdown through the air. The offense basically has no holes. So, you know, if Slovis can get things going, I mean, watch out. I think this is unquestionably a top 10 offense in the country. And let's look at the defense. You would typically think a great offense would begat a poor defense, but not necessarily so. This Pitt defense was 39th in the country in yards given up last year and 15th in the country in third down defense. And did I mention they returned 75% of that production? Do not sleep on this Pittsburgh defense. Up front, first-team all-conference defensive tackle Kalijah Kancey had 7 sacks and a forced fumble, just disrupting the backfield all season last year. To his outside, Habakkuk Baldonado was second-team all-conference selection at D-end. He had 9 sacks of his own and a forced fumble last year. Pitt also has a second-team all-conference selection in the linebacking group in Mike linebacker Servasia Dennis, who led the team in tackles with 82 and had 4 sacks of his own, and a second-team all-conference selection at safety in Brandon Hill, who came up with 71 tackles, 2 interceptions last year. Listen, Pitt came up with 16 interceptions in 2021. That's top 10 in the country. I'm telling you, the money must have been really good for Addison to leave this team. This might be my sleeper surprise team to make a run at the playoff. Now, follow me here. This is a pretty tough schedule, but it really could work to their advantage. Now, the Backyard Brawl is going to be an easy win, but then you host Tennessee. Now, I have the Vols as a top 25 team in the country, so if they can get over that hurdle, then you're kind of cruise to a 6-0 start before facing a really pretty tough final stretch. At Louisville and at North Carolina won't be easy, but they should get those wins. That sets up a final game at Miami for the division. Both teams will have 2 or fewer losses at that point. I think this could be your college football game day game of the week. With this schedule, this is why I'm saying it could work to their advantage. With this schedule, I mean, I could see Pitt lose a game, and as long as they go on to win the conference championship game, they could still make the playoff. 11-1 is my call, but this team could go undefeated. The conference is really Pitt's, in my opinion, for the taking this year. Now, speaking of those Miami Hurricanes, okay, Tyler Van Dyke is likely the name you've heard kind of bubbling to the surface. He's a former four-star quarterback out of Connecticut. He had the second-best passer rating in the ACC last year, but threw just 25 touchdowns. As a comparison, Kenny Pickett, Pittsburgh's quarterback last year, threw 42. Okay, now, I mean, he was a freshman, so he did put up great numbers considering that. But that also means he's just a sophomore this year. Van Dyke's two favorite targets from last year, Rambo and Harley, are both gone. In steps sophomore duo of Keyshawn Smith and Xavier Restrepo, but they just combined for 770 yards and 5 touchdowns last year. The Canes returned 4 starters on the O-line, and at left tackle Zion Nelson, his first team All-ACC selection. But the one starter you don't return is replaced at right guard Jalen Rivers. That dude's a freshman. Okay? I mean, your leading rusher from last year is back in Jalen Knighton, but he only went for 560 yards last year. It was really kind of a running back by committee. And, oh yeah, he's a sophomore as well. You know, so in comes Mario Cristobal, a head coach. That's obviously garnering a lot of attention. But they really have made some pretty good moves. He brought in the Broyles Award winner, Josh Gaddis, as their new offensive coordinator. For those of you that don't know, Broyles Award is the assistant coach of the year for the entire country. You know, I mean, this unit is very talented, but man, they're so young. I could see turnovers and penalties kind of becoming an issue at times. I'm not so sure how disciplined they're going to be right away under Mario Cristobal. They'll get there. He's a great coach, and they will be getting there. You know, I mean, I think this program is heading in the right direction, but not right away. This is one of those, like, USC, right, where people, right away, they're going to contend for a playoff. No, it takes some time to develop culture. Now, hey, because you come here for things you don't hear anywhere else, I want to introduce you to Lou Headley. This is the Hurricanes punter, a Ray Guy finalist, twice second-team All-Conference, and Miami was top 10 last year in the country in net punt yards. This is really kind of a secret weapon that can flip the field and change momentum in tight games. Now, this defense gave up over 4 touchdowns per game last year. Not good. They gave up over 30 points in 8 of their games. I mean, they were top 50 in the country on first down, which is something, but then it just kind of fell apart. You do return 80%, but, I mean, you won't see much of them because some big transfers have replaced them on the depth chart. The Canes' 2 leading tacklers from last year, Flagg and Steed, linebackers, both of them, are going to be riding the bench because Mitchell Agood and Caleb Johnson both transferred in from UCLA, and they are impressive. But this defensive unit is expected to start 3 sophomores on the defensive line and 3 sophomores in the secondary. That is a wildly young group, similar to the offense. The Canes have been top 17 in the country in recruiting rankings the last 3 years, so we know these kids are talented, right? But they're just inexperienced, and that takes some time. You know, I mean, it's really interesting. I mean, just think about, you know, when you think of the Canes defensive greats of old, Ed Reed, Ray Lewis, Warren Sapp, DJ Williams. Well, in 2022, they don't have a single player on the defense that was first team All-ACC. Now, quarterback Tyreek Stevenson is second team, but, I mean, this secondary is going to be in trouble. Like I said, I think the Cristobal and Josh Gaddis hires were spot on. And with all of this young talent, I mean, this team is better prepared for 2023 than any other team in the conference. The only problem is this season's 2022, and it's a pretty tough schedule. 3 of the first 4 are easy wins, but I don't see them getting past A&M. Clemson and Pitt are both losses at the end of the year, too. You know, 9-3 is my call. They could maybe get to 10-2, maybe, but that would be really a surprise. Now, how about North Carolina? Well, Sam Howell is the Tar Heels' all-time career passing leader, 10,283 yards, and plays in the NFL. So, this may be the biggest uncertainty. How will Jacoby Criswell fill that hole? Now, he was a 4-star recruit in the 2020 class, but he has thrown exactly 37 game passes for 1 touchdown and 1 interception in the past 2 seasons. Running back Ty Chandler has also moved on to the pros. He is replaced by senior British Brooks, who is, in my opinion, much more limited. He was, I think, like a second or third team selection. They do have a solid O-line in front of them, though. Grad transfers Corey Gaynor and Spencer Rowland were brought in to join an all-senior offensive line up front. Now, the wideout group for the Heels will be top-notch. Headlined by Josh Downs, who was a first-team all-conference selection and had the 10th most receiving yards in the country last year. His comrade, Antoine Green, is back as well. The two combined for almost 2,000 yards receiving in 2021. Ultimately, the offense will go as Jacoby Criswell goes, but I have them as a top 40 unit. Now, on defense, the Heels were 94th in the country in total defense last season. That is atrocious. But they do return 78%. There really is one clear star this year, and that's a familiar name, Myles Murphy. Now, you may be going, wait, I thought Myles Murphy played for Clemson. Well, you are correct. A different Myles Murphy, though. Both spell their name exactly the same. Both are all-conference. Both are juniors. And both play on the D-line. Weird, right? Anyways, this Myles Murphy plays D-tackle and had 4 sacks last year. You then have a grip of good, but not great players. The following players were all named 4th team all-conference, for whatever that's worth. Vahosek at nose tackle, Noah Taylor and Cedric Gray at linebacker, Tony Grimes at cornerback, and safety Cameron Grimes. This group should be better than they were last year, but how much, I really don't know. My numbers say 64. Now, there are a number of tricky games on the schedule, kind of sprinkled throughout. App State will be one of the better group of 5 teams again this year, and you're on the road. Then Notre Dame is likely a loss. From October 8th to November 12th, 4 of the 5 games are on the road, and the one home game is maybe the best team in the conference, in my opinion, Pittsburgh. I don't see the Heels really challenging for the division because of the difficulty of the schedule. 8-4 on the high end, but they could fall as low as 6-6. Now on to the Virginia Cavaliers. Now the Cavaliers are home to the top offense in the country according to my metrics. You know, this offense really kind of gets overlooked because Brennan Armstrong got a rib injury early in the game against Notre Dame and was severely hampered through the last 3 games of the season, all 3 of which, by the way, they lost. But through the first 9 games, this offense was averaging 39 points per game. Even though he was limited in the last 3 games and Virginia's bowl game was canceled, Armstrong had the 3rd most passing yards in the country. You return a 1,200-yard and 9-touchdown receiver in Dontavian Wicks, who was first-team all-conference selection, and a 700-yard and 6-touchdown receiver in Billy Kemp. But a brand new running back in Mike Hollins behind an O-line that will be starting 3 freshmen, I mean, that's a bit of a concern. But, you know, really, I mean, that isn't their style of play anyways. They were 102nd ranked rushing offense in the country last year, but their number 2 passing offense from last year, and basically all of that production, is back. Remember now, new head coach Tony Elliott was an offensive coordinator. He's an offensive mind. This side of the ball is going to be running and gunning. Now, let me start here with something positive on the defense. Linebacker Nick Jackson is a second-team all-conference selection. He did have 117 tackles, 2.5 sacks in 2021. He will be a solid leader at Mike linebacker. Now it's time for the hard truth. The defense was 121st in the country in total defense last year. They gave up 466 yards per game. Now, coming into the season, I mean, all your starters are upperclassmen, but they're just not good. I see some improvement, but from like 121st to like 108th in the country. So if the freshman on the O-line can keep Armstrong on his feet and the defense doesn't just completely collapse, you could maybe challenge North Carolina for 3rd in the division. You do get them at home. The non-conference schedule is really not that difficult. They could get out to a 5-0 start, but then 5 of their last 7 games are all at home, but they will lose all 5 of those. The game in Blacksburg at the end of the year will kind of determine whether these guys are, 7-5, maybe 6-6. Virginia Tech, wow. The cupboard is bare with this Hokies offense. They did not have a single player on the preseason first or second team all-conference. They returned just 51% of last year's production and will be starting 6 sophomores on this offense. 3 of which are O-linemen, and your quarterback is a sophomore, first-time starter. I mean, goodness. In 2021, this offense scored just 23 points per game. That was 97th in the nation. And for those of you keeping score at home, that's still 24 spots better than Colorado's offense was last year. Or should I say, Colorado's offensive offense was last year. But I digress. Back to Virginia Tech. Now, Grant Wells is a sophomore, and he is a first-time starter at Virginia Tech. But he was the starting quarterback at Marshall last season, where he threw for 3,500 yards. He did only have 16 touchdowns to 13 interceptions. So, again, for whatever that's worth. Running back Malachi Thomas is probably the best player on this offense, but he was only third string last year and had just 400 yards, 3 touchdowns. This offense is probably going to be tough to watch. Now, 79% of the Hokies' defense is back this year. They were 78th in total defense, but, another year of development. I think they'll be a little bit better. Now, there's not a single defensive player either that made first or second team all-conference, but there are a few good pieces here. Dax Holyfield at middle linebacker had 92 tackles, 4.5 sacks, and an interception last year. And in the secondary, Nasir was the team's leading tackler and is really kind of a good open field nickel. This Hokies defense is going to need to be stellar to give the offense time to develop. This really isn't that difficult of a schedule, though, so there is some time. Your first 4 games are all against teams with talent rankings 60 or below. You're going to get crushed the next 4, but then Georgia Tech at home, the last 3 are all kind of toss-ups. I've got them 5-7. They could get to 6-6, but 4-8 is a possibility as well. But, man, this is a long way from the Frank Beamer days of old. How about Georgia Tech? Head coach Jeff Collins is firmly on the hot seat. Here's another reference I use, by the way. CoachesHotSeat.com has him on the 3rd hottest seat in all of FBS. People forget, man, Paul Johnson got fired after the 2018 season. They went 7-6. In the 3 seasons under Collins since, Tech has gone 3-9, 3-7, and 3-9. They returned just 58% of their offensive production and lost their only real credible weapon in Yamir Gibbs. I talked about earlier, primetime transfer to Alabama. Now, starting quarterback Jeff Sims is back, but he threw for just 1,200 yards last year. I mean, this offense is going to be starting 6 sophomores and 2 freshmen. I mean, damn. Now, if the offense is bad, I mean, the defense is worse. The defense was 117th in the country in 2021, and they returned just 54%. Charlie Thomas will really kind of need to do everything at linebacker to give Tech a chance against Boston College and Virginia. I mean, this defense is starting 2 sophomores and a freshman as well. Now, I'm going to say something here that's going to shock you, but it's true. Georgia Tech has won a conference championship, 2009, more recently than the Florida Gators, 2008. Look it up. Look it up. Our stats are better than your stats. Now, let's take a look at the schedule. Good Lord, look at that first game and that last game. Unbelievable. You do get Duke at home on October 8th, and then a bye week before Virginia on October 20th. Listen, Tech fans, this is probably a 3-9 season again. Could be worse. Collins has got to go. And now let's wrap things up with our final team in the ACC, the Duke Blue Devils. Well, in comes new head coach Mike Elko, and he inherits a team that returns the 5th least production in the nation, all across the board. On offense, they bring back just 44%. First-time starting sophomore quarterback Riley Leonard has thrown just 62 passes ever, and he's behind an O-line that has 4 new starters, one of which is a sophomore. I mean, your leading rusher from last year, Mateo Durant, went pro. He was a stud. And your top wideout, Jake Bobo, transferred to UCLA. Now, on the defense, this was the absolute worst defense in the country last year. And maybe I have them kind of ranked a little too high, but I actually like some of the moves that they have made. Shaka Hayward at middle linebacker had 97 tackles last year, and he's back. I mean, that's a solid, serviceable piece. And the Blue Devils brought in a couple of decent transfers in the secondary. Darius Joyner from Western Illinois and Detron Young from Iowa State. Now, before we get carried away, I mean, this is for sure the least talented team in the ACC. and 111th in the country. But you have a really soft schedule, especially early. You have the worst team in the American Conference in Temple at home. Then you're at one of the worst teams in the Big Ten, if not the worst, in Northwestern. You then get FCS, North Carolina A&T, and then travel to the worst team in the Big 12, which is Kansas. I mean, this is without question the easiest non-conference schedule amongst all the Power 5 teams. I could see them winning maybe 2 of those, but they'll lose every conference game for sure. 2-10 in year 1 for Mike Elko. Yikes, man. Good luck. Now let's take one final look here at our power rankings from the Atlantic Division. And you can see how my numbers have that all breaking out. And one final look here at the power rankings from the Coastal Division and how we have each of those teams falling out. Remember, man, if you can get good odds on Pittsburgh, I would pick them to win the ACC. And you may be able to get some good odds. They're a little bit under the radar. But with all that being said, let's close out here with a look at some of the kind of marquee early Week 1, Week 2 games that we're going to see out of this conference. There really aren't a ton. There really aren't. Okay, but on Thursday, September 1st, you got the Backyard Brawl, West Virginia at Pittsburgh. You know my opinion. I think that's going to be just a straight-up beatdown. But West Virginia's got JT Daniels, a great quarterback. So, I mean, it could turn into a high-flying passing game. We'll see about that. That's Thursday. The next day, Friday, you have Temple at Duke. Listen, if you're a casual football fan, you don't want to watch that one. But these two teams, they're both very bad. But they match up very, very well. It's going to be like, I don't know, going and watching your kid brother's team play at the YMCA or something. It'll be a close game. And it'll be really important for both of these schools if they can get that win. Then Saturday, September 3rd, Rutgers at Boston College. Kind of a similar situation. You got two very mediocre, somewhere between 50 and 70 power ranking teams going against each other. It is at Boston College. I'd give them the nod on that one. Then you got NC State against East Carolina. I told you a little bit of a depleted defensive front from NC State, taking on really one of the under the radar, one of the better running backs in the country in Keaton Mitchell at East Carolina. I do think NC State gets the win there, though. Then the next day, Sunday, September 4th, Florida State continues their early season marquee games. Remember, they played Notre Dame last year. This season, they are at LSU. Two big brand names, but they're really, really down programs. So it's going to be a very important game for both of these programs as well. You have Mike Norvell, who may lose his job if they lose that game, and Brian Kelly, a brand new coach at LSU. Interesting dynamics in that one. Week 2 on Friday, September 9th. I think this is going to be a fantastic game. Louisville at UCF in the Bounce House. Going to be so much fun. Malik Cunningham, remember that name. And then I mentioned in my previous conference preview of the American Athletic Conference, the running back at UCF, Isaiah Bowser. I'm really high on him. So that's going to be a fun game to watch. And then Saturday, September 10th, Week 2, Tennessee at Pittsburgh. This is going to be a fantastic juggernaut of a matchup because I think Tennessee's much better. They've got Hendon Hooker. They've got a tremendous talent at skill positions. So that one's going to be a fun one to watch. Mark your calendars. Whew! Okay, we made it. That was our preseason preview of the Atlantic Coast Conference, the ACC. Feel free to send me your feedback. Let me know. Did I miss something? Did I get something wrong? Are you real excited about something I said and you want to make sure I say it again in another preview? Whatever it may be, send me your feedback. Remember, you can follow us at RightOnQCS on Twitter, or you can email me rightonqcs@gmail.com. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share this content with anyone that you think might find it interesting. We are getting closer and closer to that college football season. I think the next previews I have coming up are the Big Ten and the SEC. Really getting excited. So thanks again for checking us out. Thanks for the support. You have been watching Right on Cue College Sports. I am Tyson Quiller, and we will get at you next time.
Van Dyke kicks it off. Picked up. Tyree. Here's Tyree with the lane. Tyree! Whoa! Can he get there? Tyree at the 30, 20, 10, touchdown, Notre Dame!
Boise State for the win. Michigan at the 41. What a hit! Ball's free, on the ground. South Carolina deserves to have it, and they do. USC brings some pressure. They get to Chenault, and there it goes. Laviska Chenault. They're not going to catch him.
Michigan still out of timeouts. The kick is blocked. It's picked up. Michigan State's got it.
Snap from Patrick Lewis. Four-man Alabama rush. Got him. Oh, no, they didn't. Oh, my gracious. How about that? 30 yards. So on first down now, another play fake. And again, trying to get away. Stays alive and throws a pick. Throw it right to the defender. Down the sideline, Merlin Robertson is going to be tracked down from behind. And the ball comes out. Second down now. Deep strike. Got the big man. Pulls free. And touchdown.
Showing the young clubhouse now. The baptism. Fournette into the secondary. Runs over a man. Leonard Fournette.
Was presented by the National Football Foundation.
Martinez is throwing over the middle.